News Talk 1400 KFRU is proud to present the KFRU Heritage Series. It's a 1-hour perspective on the events and the people whose lives have contributed to the heritage of Boone County. The KFRU Heritage Series.
Well, it's good to have our guest. You'll know him because you'll know his voice from Tiger Broadcast over the years, and you'll just know him as a great personality in this community. I've really looked forward to talking to John Cadillac as our guest on the Heritage Show. It's good to see you. How are you doing today?
Yeah, fine, David. I'm glad to be here.
Let's talk about, I want to get started talking about your experiences. I'm not going to go when you first became connected with Columbia and MU Sports, but let's talk more in this first segment about your experience as a broadcaster. How did it come about that you were involved in broadcast of Mizzou football?
I'll tell you what, David. Here's what happened. Here's what happened here at Missouri. One day I was sitting in my office, and Joe Castiglione, he was the athletic director at that time. He came in and he said, "John, I need a favor." I said, "Anything, Joe. What can I do for you?" He said, this was Thursday now. We're playing football on Saturday. He said to me, "I'd like for you to be in the booth on Saturday and do the color analyst for the football game." I said, "What do you mean? You mean Saturday?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Kellen Winslow just called and he resigned his position." I said, "Well, Joe, I thought you were going to ask me for a favor that I could do an errand for you." I said, "I'll do anything for you, but I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that." He said, "You got to do it." He said, "Think about it." I said, "Okay, I'll think about it," but not very long. So anyway, about 2 hours later, he came in and we talked. I said, "Okay, Joe, I'll tell you what, I'm going to do it one time." Now, this is Thursday. I didn't prepare. I don't know anything about the other team hardly, just, their quarterback's name and so forth. And I hadn't gone out to see our team practice much, but I knew our team. So anyway, I did the game. And, boy, I went, whew, the game was over. I felt so good that I was getting out of the booth. I went downstairs, got off the elevator, and here was Joe Castiglione. And he says, "John, I'll tell you what." He said, "I found someone to do the show." I said, "You did?" I said, "That's wonderful." And I was so happy. I said, "Who is it, may I ask?" He said, "You." I said, "Oh, no." So anyway, that's how I got started. I did it for Joe, and I had a great time doing it. I think I was 17 years with it, and I enjoyed Mike Kelly. Mike Kelly's a great play-by-play guy, and he gave me some room to talk on the show. And so, but I really enjoyed it, and I also enjoyed traveling around to the other teams, because I saw some old retired coaches like me. They're always in the press box, and I always felt very connected to Nebraska. I knew those coaches very well, and they were a great bunch of guys, and we had a great rivalry with them. So it was a lot of fun. But I'll tell you what, David, in 2010, I told my wife, I said, "I think that I'm going to quit it." Mm-hmm. She said, "What?" I said, "I think I'm going to quit it." She said, "Well, if you're just thinking about it, that means you're not sure, right?" I said, "Well, I think I'm pretty sure." She said, "Well, why don't you do it 210? Why don't you do it the whole?" I said, "Okay, I'll do it." She said, "Because you're not sure." I said, "Well, I think I'm sure." So anyway, we played Nevada out in Reno, and we got home at 6:30 in the morning. I walked in the house at 6:30. And she was up getting ready to go to church, 7 o'clock Mass, and I said to her, "Well, Dolly," her name was Dolly. I said, "Well, Dolly, I'll tell you what, I decided this is it. I'm not going to work next year. This is it, because I can't take this getting home 3, 4, 5, and then at 6:30 in the morning." So anyway, I had a great run, David. I had a wonderful time, and it's kind of like playing poker. You got to know when to hold them and when to fold them, and the posse wasn't after me yet, so you know what? So I quit at a good time.
John Cadillac is our guest on our Heritage Show. We're talking about, we started talking about his experiences as a broadcaster, and he says 17 years, quit right after the 2010 season. You miss it, though, a bit, don't you? I mean, there's something about it, even the late-night trips and getting back early.
What? I miss it, but I tell you what I get to do. I get to take all the trips with the football team. And there's no pressure on me whatsoever. And the difference is doing the games and taking the trips like I'm doing now is that I don't have to worry about, I don't have to study as hard and so forth. I have no pressure on me. And after the game, I go to the bus and sit down. Whereas after the game, at a football game, you gotta wrap it up and all that. So once in a while, I miss it, and I miss the camaraderie you have up there.
What was the first team? Do you remember that first team when Joe Castiglione came up on a Thursday and said, "Hey, I want you to be in the booth on Saturday"? You remember what team it was?
I think the first team was Bowling Green.
Yeah,
I think,
and that would have been a hard one to do because it's not a conference school. It's a team that you only play once in a while, and it comes from a mid-major conference.
Yeah,
so it's
see,
not...
any opening game like that is a game you're not familiar with because they're usually out of the conference and more or less patsies.
People don't have a real good idea of what goes on in a broadcast booth. It's not just you and Mike Kelly. You've got a producer there. Sometimes you have an engineer. I was surprised because a couple of years I got to be up there doing some work. People coming in and out of the booth, talking to you in your headset and everything. How did you? You didn't have experience doing that.
Well, I tell you what. I just try to just more or less just not paying any attention to it. They tap you on the shoulder and they, "Hey, hi John, how you doing?" You turn around and I'd say, "Hi, go on." But it is very, very disturbing, because you're trying to get some continuity, But after a while, I just kind of just said hi and that's it,
How did you learn how to prepare? Because
I think it was
preparation
pretty easy to prepare. What I did, I went to practice Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And I watched practice, and I watched what they were running, and and then I could anticipate in the ball game what plays they're going to run. So I'd watch practice, and I think practice helped me more than anything because I knew the third down tendencies and so forth, and what they would do on first down inside of their area. So I went to practice, and then on the other teams, on the opponent, what I did, I got some tapes. And I start looking at them about on Wednesday. I didn't want to look at them until I looked at them about Wednesday. So I looked at them Wednesday, Thursday, and had a good idea who the great players were and what they ran and what their offense was. And I'd have the personnel sheet from the scouting report that the football coaches would give me. So that helped me. Mm-hmm. So, but mostly watching practice and then watching the tapes of the opponent.
One of the things I think I remember from the broadcast, there was this ongoing joke at times, it seemed like, about you and steaks. You'd like to, didn't he talk about
we would talk. Mike would say, John, where'd you eat last night? I said, well, I'd say, Mike, we ate at Joe's Steakhouse. What'd you have? I said, I would say, well, Mike, I'll tell you what. I had a steak. It was as tender as a mother's love, and he loved that term. He loved that term.
That was fun. That was like one of those things that you expected. If you didn't hear that during a broadcast, you were kind of disappointed. I mean, if you're a listener like I was sometimes.
And we talk. He bait me. We talk about food, and so forth. We had a lot of fun.
What was the hard? I mean, you have such a nice connection with MU, and it's fun to listen to broadcasters who have this emotion. When it's tough, and when it's a success. I mean, the highs and lows. Can you recall some of the really high points and some of the really low points as a broadcaster?
Well, some of the high points were the high point when we beat Oklahoma down here. That was terrific. We very seldom beat Oklahoma. That was great. And some of the low points are when you lose the teams you're not supposed to lose to, and you say, well, your voice is not affected, your demeanor's not affected. When it really is. I mean, you're not as enthusiastic as when you're kicking them pretty good. See. But there's been a lot of highs, been beating teams. But I think the biggest when we beat Oklahoma, I actually had tears in my eyes when we beat Oklahoma.
Isn't it something? I mean, was it ever hard to talk because of the emotion?
I don't think so. Yeah. No, I don't think so. No.
But it's just a great celebration. You're so high up off the field at the MU Memorial Stadium. Was it ever? I mean, I can't remember you using. Did you use binoculars or anything like that?
No, luckily for an old guy, my eyesight is pretty good, and so the only time I'd use binoculars is let's say that when somebody got hurt and they were gathered around them, and I had to find a number. That's when I use binoculars. But as far as watching the whole plays or anything like that, I never use binoculars.
Get much feedback from what you do? I mean, did you become a celebrity when people would see you? That's John Kadlec.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let me tell you what happened. I was about, I guess, my second year doing the broadcast, and I got a letter from a guy at the office in Southeast Missouri, and he said, Coach Cadillac, he said, I met you before, and you're a nice guy. He said, but I want to tell you something. You murder the English language on the broadcast. So I wrote him back. I said, so does Mike Shannon.
You're exactly right. And look at what his career has been like.
Yeah. So anyway, I had a couple letters with little criticism that I was too much for the home team. You know, they would say, you know, you're really a homer. And I would write back. I said, well, I'll tell you what. I work for them. They're paying me, so I'm going to be a homer. That's the way it is.
It is the Missouri net. It's not the neutral net. It's the Missouri net, and you got to have some of that. But you've also, as you alluded to, anybody that's worked in broadcasting or anything where people actually feel like they come to know you and they feel like, oh, they've got a connection with you. And that's what happens with broadcast and broadcasters of sports games. They live and die with you.
Well, yeah, well, you know, and I would tell it like it is a lot of the times. But I'll tell you what. Years and years ago, when I started this thing, Jack Buck was a good friend of mine, and I admired him so much. He's the best, and he's the Stan Musial of the broadcasting. Mm-hmm. Nobody will ever touch Jack Buck. But anyway, I called Jack, and I got a hold of him, and I said, Jack, you know, they got me doing the analysis for the football games. Oh, he says, kid, I called you Kid. Kid, you're going to do great. He said, oh, boy. I said, well, I don't know. I want a little advice. Could you give me some advice? And he says, yeah, I'll give you some advice. He says, take the word should have out of your vocabulary. Now think of that, should have. Well, they should have run this. They should have ran the ball on the 2-yard line. They should have thrown this pass. Wow. They should have done this. And you know, I really tried to live by that rule. Don't use should have, you know, and because now you're second guessing, and anybody can second guess. But I always really thank Jack. I said, Jack, that's the greatest advice I could have. One day, Jack and Carol were having dinner and were having lunch at the Schneidhorst in St. Louis. And I was sitting at a table 3 or 4 tables away from him with a friend of mine. And so Jack and Carol came in, and Jack came over, and he says, Cad, I tell you what, he did a good job last week, he said, but I'll tell you what, he said, you said that the defense of Missouri was really good. Boy, they stopped them for a 3-yard gain, and the next play, you had to tell them they ran for a 24-yard gain.
How did you meet Jack Buck? How did you become friends with him?
Oh, I tell you what, I met Jack Buck when I was a coach recruiting St. Louis. And, of course, you know, it's easy to meet Jack Buck. He's so friendly and so accessible. And I met him years ago at a dinner and where he was MC. And he and I just got to be friends, and he just was just a wonderful guy. And I was at a dinner, well, I'll tell you what it was. I think it was probably about 8 or 9 years ago at the MAC, Sportsman of the Year dinner. Uh-huh. He was the MC. And in the middle of the program, he said, ladies and gentlemen, I have to be excused. My son Joe's going to take over. And Jack passed my table. And I got up, and he said, hi, kid, how you doing? Shook his hand. Well, he checked into Barnes Hospital that night, and he never came out.
Oh, my.
And I'll never forget that night when I shook his hand. But he was a wonderful guy, and he's one of the greatest people I've ever met.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that because I just admired him so much. I grew up on the front step. You know, everybody has memories, and I used to listen to the Cardinals with Jack Buck and Harry Carey at that point in time, and my dad and I spent many a night with the little transistor radio out on our front stoop, looking out over our front yard and our front pond with the night falling down around us and listening to them. And Jack Buck with so many calls and such things that he was able to do, and it just made you. I used to get goose pimples listening to him do some calls.
Yeah, he was fantastic, and you know what he did? He was a heck of a football announcer too. Play-by-play, very, very good.
He used to do with Hank Stram.
Yeah, and you know, way back when when he was doing it with Harry Carey, Jack was this kind of a guy. He always let Harry be the front man. And now when Harry left, where'd Harry go? Chicago?
Yes, he did.
When Harry went to Chicago, why then Jack took over. But now there was another guy. Harry Carey was a real great Missouri guy. He loved the Tigers, and Dan Devine was the coach at that time. And Dan knew how to. The one thing Dan could do is pat a guy on the back. He knew who to pat and who not to pat. And he had Bob Bragg, Bob Burns, Harry Carey, Jack Buck.
Oh, wow.
I want to tell you what, that was a fearsome foursome, and they stuck with Dan all the way.
If Dan you had those guys on your side, I mean,
Dan could do no wrong.
No. Oh, wow. We're talking with John Cadillac. We've spent this first segment talking about his thoughts of being a broadcaster. You'll know him a lot of people know him as a coach, great supporter of MU sports. And when we come back, we're going to talk about his early connections with the University of Missouri and some of the other people that he can remember along the way, coaches and athletes, and some of his experiences. Stay with us. You're listening to the Heritage Show. This is News Talk 1400 KFRU.
This is the KFRU Heritage Series. More coming up on News Talk 1400 KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
Hope you're enjoying our visit with John Cadillac on the Heritage Show today on News Talk 1400 KFRU. Let's, we ended up talking about, you were talking about Jack Buck, and then you talk about Dan Devine and his relationship with four of the biggies, media people in St. Louis, and how important that was. Can you talk about Stan Musial and these guys, about how they helped with recruiting for Missouri when you were
Well, in those days, what we could do, we could ask people to write letters to the prospects, and we used Governor Hearns. We used Stan Musial. We used Bob Burns, Bob Bragg, Jack Buck, and they would write letters, and we wouldn't wear them out. We'd give them maybe each about 4 top prospects apiece, like Joe Moore, who was a great player for us. And they would write to the kid, and we would kind of give them a little bio so they know what they're talking about. And I'll never forget, I went into a home, and great player, and the mother immediately said, "Coach Cadillac, guess who I got a letter from? Or guess who we got a letter from?" I said, "No, who's that?" She said, "Stan Musial." I said, "Wait a minute. You got a letter from Stan Musial?" She says, "Yes." "Well, you want to read it?" I said, "Yes." So I read it. Of course, it was like, and I said, "This is terrific." And, of course, the last part of it was, "I look forward to seeing you play at Missouri."
Yeah.
And let me tell you, you talk about effective.
I was going to say
those letters were, we missed, I want to say very, very few in those 10 years, and but you got a letter from the 331 lifetime hitter, Stan. He was active, and so forth. The first time I went in to see Stan about this, boy, was I intimidated. I was a young coach, and I went over to Biggie's and Stan's on the second floor. That's where his office was, and I was really intimidated, and I walked up to the secretary. I told you when we were off the air, she's still living. She's a wonderful gal, and she's been with Stan for 50 years. But anyway, I said, "I'm here to see Mr. Musial, and my name is John Cadillac. I have an appointment." "Oh, yes." So she gets on the intercom, and here comes Stan. He's got a bat in his hand. He's got that left-handed stance, and I'm thinking, boy, what am I going to do? So anyway, so I went in there, and he said, "Oh, yeah." He says, "Coach Devine called me about writing some letters." I said, "Well, here's some information on 4 of them I want you to do." So he was so kind, and of course, he's that way. That's his reputation. He was so kind and just a wonderful guy, and once in a while we still have lunch together. We get together, a bunch of the guys at the MAC, and he's 91 years old. I believe he's 91, and he enjoys it. He doesn't say much, but he enjoys it. And
you'd have to have a good success rate. I mean, if you get a letter from Stan Musial or Jack Buck or any of those guys, I mean, if the parents, especially if the dad, knew you got that and you were a prospect and a player, your success rate of recruiting those guys have to be pretty high.
Well,
that's pretty impactful.
It was very, very high in the St. Louis area and in the Kansas City area. Vince Tobin recruited the Kansas City area. And we used the mayor there, and we used Governor Hearns. Governor Hearns was very, very good about writing letters, and he'd write letters to all of our prospects throughout the state. So we had it going, but unfortunately, the NCAA, now you can't do that, but it's a great tool. It was a great tool for us,
John Cadillac is our guest. Where are you from originally?
Well, I'm from St. Louis. I was born and raised in South St. Louis, and I went to Cleveland High School one semester. To the disappointment of my mother. My dad wanted me to go to Cleveland. I was just a half a block away. Mom wanted me to go to Catholic school, but you know what? The moms went out in the end. The next semester I transferred to Southside Catholic, which is St. Mary's now. We had a boys' school of 800 boys,
Wow.
And great school, had a great time. And I first started playing football at Cleveland High School. A coach saw me walking down the hall, and he said, "What's your name?" And I told him. He says, "You ever played football?" I said, No. He says, "Well, why don't you come down and see me after school?" And so I went downstairs to see him. He talked to me about it. Why don't you come out? I said, well, you know what? I'd like to. I said, I'm not a very good baseball player. I can't go out for baseball. I said, yeah, I'd like to try it. So he gave me a parent consent card. You have a parent consent card. So I brought it home, and Mom and Dad signed it, and I went out for football the next day. I honestly, I didn't know they were giving me equipment, and I didn't know what the thigh pads were supposed to be, or the hip pads and so forth. And I think I put the thigh pads on the hips and the hip pads on the thighs, and I tell you, I was so foul, I didn't know anything about it, So one of the guys helped me put my stuff on, and I went out to practice, and I just stood there. I didn't know what I was going to do. And so anyway, Coach Jansen said, "Hey, Johnny, you play right next to the center right here. We call that a guard." So I got next to the center, and I played B-team football in that first semester.
Yeah.
Then I went to St. Mary's, and then I played on the varsity in my sophomore, junior, and senior year, and it was a great experience down there. All boys school. We had a pretty good team, and
what was the Go ahead.
And see, at Cleveland High School, they gave you all the equipment, shoes and everything. So I checked out my equipment at Southside Catholic, and I went to the brother. They were brothers of Mary, Catholic brothers. I said, "Brother, you didn't give me any shoes." He said, "Well, you got to buy your shoes."
No.
I said, "You do?" And he says, "Yeah." Well, I said, "Okay." So I went back to my locker, and I put on my shoes that I wore to school, So I went out that afternoon, and the coach looked at me, and he said, "You don't like to wear football shoes?" I said, "Well, no, I didn't know, but we got to buy them." He said, "Well, yeah, we don't furnish shoes." And I said, "Well, I can play the rest of the day with these." They were kind of wingtips, So anyway, after practice, while I was sitting in my locker, and the equipment brother came up to me, and he says, "I'm going to tell you something now, Johnny." He said, "I'm going to give you a pair of shoes. I don't want you to tell anybody." I said, "What?" He said, "I'm going to give you a pair of shoes. What size you're wearing?" I told him. He said, "You come to the equipment room, but I don't want you to tell anybody I'm giving you these." Well, come to find out, he told that to about 25 other guys. He was giving shoes away, but they had that policy in there just in case, But anyway, so I had a wonderful time playing at Southside Catholic. And
what did your father do?
Well, my father was a truck driver for Biederman Furniture Company. He was a truck driver all his life. And we had a little house in South St. Louis, 2 bedrooms, very, very small, but very nice. And I didn't know that we were average income. We had a lot of fun, and Mom and Dad gave us everything that we needed. I had a ball glove, I had a ball, I had a bat.
That's pretty much what you need.
Yeah, pretty what I needed. So anyway, and it was a great neighborhood. We had wonderful guys, and I still see some of the guys that lived in the neighborhood.
What was recruiting like out of high school?
Well, I didn't have any scholarship offers. When I was finished with football, I had one offer, and that was the University of Tennessee. Oh, I was so excited. And so they arranged a trip. Now, at that time, the guy was a famous coach named General Bob Neyland, national championship guy. He was a great, he's a Hall of Fame. He's everything, General Neyland.
Named the stadium after him.
Neyland Stadium, Neyland. Yeah. So anyway, so in those days, you went down there on the trip, but you had to try out. It was legal. So Saturday morning, to give you some equipment, to give you a helmet, no shoulder pads, and you block a dummy and you move, you run, and you block a dummy some more, and so forth, And I think there were 19 of us that were down there, and Sunday morning we had a final workout, and there were 8 of us left out of the 19. And I guess the other guys went home. I never did find out. So after we got done working out, you went in to see the coach, and he gave you a letter, and you made a scholarship. So I had a scholarship to Tennessee. Very excited. I was so excited I couldn't believe it. So I got home, and Dad said, "How'd it go?" I said, "Whoa, it was great, Dad. So it was terrific." I said, "That's where I'm going. I'm going to Tennessee." And Mom, who was great, she's a sweet gal, she said, "Well, Johnny," she said, "I want you to go to Catholic school." She said, "I think Notre Dame would be good." I said, "Mom, Father Brand, the priest at school, I asked him about that. He said, 'John, you're not good enough to go to Notre Dame.'" Of course, she perked up. "What do you mean?" I said, "Mom, I'm not good enough to go to Notre Dame. I'm not that kind of a player." So I ended up at St. Louis University, and that was fate. It was absolutely the greatest thing that happened to me. I went out for football in the spring. I was still in high school. You could do that. It was legal. A lot of things were legal in those days. So I had 8 weeks of spring football when I was a senior.
Still in high school.
And they just beat the heck out of me. There was a lot of veterans. They beat the heck out of me. They were something. They're great guys, and to this day I can remember them just like it was. They're wonderful guys too, and they're great friends of mine. So anyway, I made the team, and we played Marquette. We played Missouri University, beat us 60-0 at Wall Stadium. We played, like I said, we played Marquette. We played schools like Iowa State, and we were okay. I guess maybe we ended up 500. And but I really didn't like school. But even at that, I made a perfect score. I took 15 hours, and I got 15 hours of F.
Wow.
I didn't go to class. The only class I went to was Spanish class, because I was kind of stuck on a gal. She was a great looking blonde, man, and I told my guys, I said, I got to go to Spanish class. I'd be sitting over there watching them build a TV tower every day, and I went to Spanish class, and her and I got acquainted, and we ended up being married 60 years.
How about that?
So fate played a great part in my life, because there's a reason I went to St. Louis U, not to make grades or not to study or not to be anything like that, but to meet the love of my life, and that was it. See, so anyway, so after St. Louis U, I wanted to see the coach. Duke Stuford was a heck of a guy. He was a great coach and a wonderful man, a wonderful human being. He was our head coach. And I said, "Coach, I've done very, very poor in school. I didn't go to class, and I'm going to drop out." And he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I got a job driving an ice truck." So I had a job driving an ice truck, 80 cents an hour, and Duke Stuford, the coach at St. Louis U, called his good friend Don Farreau.
Oh.
And he said, "Coach, I got a kid down here that I think can make your team." And he said, "Well, how come he's not on your team?" He quit. He flunked out. And Coach Farreau immediately said, "Well, that's not for me. I don't need that kid." and Dukes kept on him, and Dukes called him again, Duke Stuford. So one day, here's a Missouri coach in my living room, and I'm sick. I thought, I don't want to go to school. So anyway, my mom says, his name was Houston Betty, he was a center coach here, center and linebacker coach. She said, "Would you come back this evening and see my husband, Frank?" Then I knew that I was in trouble. So he came back, and I don't think he was there 5 minutes, and Dad says, "Well, when do you want him to report?" Well, I'm sitting there, and I would never talk back to my dad or my mom. And my eyes got big. I thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. So he said, well, he's going to August the 13th. We practice the 15th, start practice. Dad said, well, he'll be there. So Coach Betty leaves, and Dad goes in the kitchen and has a cup of coffee and lights up a Camel cigarette. That's what he smoked. And I go into the kitchen, sit at the table. I'm thinking, now, how can I approach this tackle? So anyway, I said, Dad, I got a good job. He said, oh, you got a good job. He said, you make 80 cents an hour. He said, I make $1.90. And he said, someday you'll get to $1.90. He said, but I'm going to see that you don't get to $1.90. He said, you're going to school and you have nothing to say about it.
Wow.
And absolutely nothing to say about it. And he said, you're going to make you're going to make it. Well, I shut up then. I backed off. I thought, well, maybe there's another strategy. But anyway, there was no strategy. He took me down. We didn't have a car. He took me out of the bus station, put me on a Greyhound bus, and I cried all the way to Jonesburg. I didn't want to go. Once I got up here, I saw a bunch of kids from McBride High School, St. Louis U, Cleveland High School, guys that I knew, guys that, were in the neighborhood. I saw all those guys, and I thought, boy, this is great. And you know what? I was here 2 days, and I loved it, and that started me out at Missouri here. And I had some great coaches when we were freshmen. There were about 100 kids out for freshman football in those days. The head coach was a guy named John High Simmons. Oh. Terrific coach, a terrific guy, knew how to communicate with kids. He's the last guy that won a national championship here. He won the national championship in baseball. And a couple runner-ups.
Stadium named after him?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, he was a darn good football coach, too. And he really could communicate with the kids. And so anyway, I played freshman football, so I had an advantage because I played varsity football a year before.
With St. Louis.
So I had an advantage, and there were guys, great football player was a coach, a guy named Bob Stuber, National College Football Hall of Fame. He was a great player. I think he got 8 or 10 letters here at Missouri. Great athlete, track, baseball, football. So they were my coaches, and I was very, very fortunate. Moved up on the varsity the next year and head coach for a very, very fortunate.
Let me take a break. We'll come back and talk more about those years in a moment. John Cadillac, our guest. You're listening to the Heritage Show on KFRU.
This is the KFRU Heritage Series. More coming up on News Talk 1400 KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
One final segment with John Cadillac. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I hope our listeners have too. And you can give feedback at david.lyle@cumulus.com. I always like to hear feedback on our Heritage program, and we appreciate our guests giving us the time to sit down and talk with them. And John Cadillac, it's you got tons of stories. And you know what? You've got to this point here, and we've got only about 8 minutes left in this program of reaching Mizzou. You bring up some names that I hope people will never forget the impact of people like Don Faroe to this university. Can you give us a feel of your experiences with him and what kind of guy Don Faroe was?
Well, Don Faroe was a guy, he was all Tiger. He was all Missouri. And he took a great interest in his players. So he knew my biography when I came here as a freshman, and he brought me in his office. And he knew that I didn't want to go to class at St. Louis U. He knew all about that, of course, from my previous coach. He sat me down and he said, now, I'm just going to tell you something, John. He called me Johnny. He said, Johnny, I tell you what, you're going to make all C's or better in this first semester, and you're going to continue that the second semester. In those days, you could make 24 hours D and be eligible. But he said, you're going to make C's. And he said, you're going to go to class. And he said, you're going to do this, do that. And he said, because if you don't, I'm not going to have you. I don't want you around. Well, I don't think he gave that talk to many other people, but he had to give it to me because he knew my history. And Coach Faroux stuck with me all these many, many years. And I'll tell you what, I really, really felt very, very close to him. And when I got really close to him was when I was through playing, and he gave me a shot to be a freshman coach. Mm-hmm. And I coached for him, and I coached as a freshman. Then I coached for him, and then when he retired, he hired a guy named Frank Broyles. Mm-hmm. Can I get into this?
Yeah, please.
He hired a guy named Frank Broyles, and Clay Cooper and I were teaching physical education at that time. I was making $4,000 coaching, and $1,500 of that $4,000 was given to Coach Faroux for us being in the phys ed department. So Coach Faroux only had to pay $2,500. And I think Clay was making $75, so Coach Faroux only had to pay $6. Okay? And Coach Faroux was very budget conscious. So anyway, so here comes Coach Broyles, and I'm thinking, I'm going to have to move back to St. Louis and sell crackers or something. I said, with new coach. So I went in to see Coach Broyles, and I asked him. I said, I'm going to be very, very straight to the point. I said, I wonder if you'd hire me as one of your coaches. He says, I'll hire you as one of my coaches, but he says, you can't teach phys ed. You got to be on the road Monday through Thursday. And Coach Broyles was the first coach that introduced aggressive recruiting at Missouri. Mm. So I went to see Coach, and I told him what Coach Broyles said. He said, he kind of grimaced with his face. I said, well, Coach, I love to coach. And he said, well, you get back to me this afternoon. I said, okay. So I got back this afternoon, and he said, Johnny, he said, I'm going to let you go. He said, I think that you're going to make a good coach. And he said, I know you want to coach. You and Cooper, why you don't have to teach physical education. So I went to see Coach Broyles, and wonderful. So we coached, Coach Cooper and I coached for Coach Broyles, and I'll tell you what about him. He only was here 1 year. There's a lot of people criticized him for leaving after 1 year. We were paying him $14,500. He had 4 children, and Mr. Barnhill, the AD at Arkansas, offered him $26,000. So anybody that wouldn't leave Missouri is stupid. So he left Missouri, but I'll tell you this, with all due respect to the other coaches we've had here at Missouri, I think Coach Broyles would have won the national championship.
Really?
I really do. Mm. I just think that his method of coaching and his recruiting and so forth, I really think he'd have won the national. He won it at Arkansas, by the way. And Arkansas is not an easy place to recruit. But he won it at Arkansas, and he was a great guy to work for. A wonderful wife, Barbara, and he had those 4 kids. He had twins and 2 other boys. He ended up having 6 children. But he was a wonderful guy and a great coach. He had a great staff. He had Jerry Claiborne, who went on to Virginia Tech to coach, and they won the championship down there. Had a guy named Jim McKenzie, who was who became the head coach at Oklahoma. He had good coaches, and we all worked hard for him, but we recruited very aggressive. That was the team. He was here in 1957, I think. 57 or 58. Mm-hmm. But the 59 Orange Bowl team and the 60 Orange Bowl team at Missouri were the fruits of his recruiting. The Norris Stevensons and people like that, the Ed Blaines, the Danny LaRose, these are all Americans. Mm-hmm. And they were the fruits of his recruiting. So those 2 Orange Bowl teams were his recruiting. His recruiting,
but I mean, you were doing. Well,
the assistant coach. But I tell you what, Frank would do. Frank would come in and close him. He'd come into the home, and he was very impressive in the home, just like Coach Devine and Coach Faroux. They were all very, 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 very good in the home, very homey,
Yeah.
So, but Frank was a great coach. Then we got lucky. By the way. When Coach Faroux had Frank Broyles in, he had another coach in here as a candidate, a guy named Bob Devaney. So what I'm saying, so this tells you how good Coach Faroux is in judging coaching talent.
Yeah.
So then when Frank left, he brings in a guy named Dan Devine. And this guy was a big winner at Arizona State. So he brings in Dan Devine, and of course Cooper and I, we just rolled over with him. We were very lucky, coach, with Dan. So anyway, when Dan came in, he had great teams. And sad to say, that's the last time we won a conference championship in 1969.
Yeah,
that's too long for a place like Missouri. We should win it.
We have only about a minute left. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I'd love to hear more stories about Dan Devine and all that time period. But overall, you just got such a love of Mizzou, don't you? I mean, think about how you had to be encouraged to come here by your dad.
Well, I'm going to tell you
ordered
something.
to come here by your dad.
Well, I was ordered to come here by my dad, but I tell you what, when I look back, everything I've got, everything I've got, and all the good memories and all the friends I've got is due to the University of Missouri. Yeah. I made some great professorial friends, guys like Dr. Rufai, Dr. Lauren G. Townsend, who the education school named. I had terrific professors, and they were great people, and they were very personable with the students. So. How about that? That really helped me. But yeah, Missouri's been terrific to me, and I'll tell you what, the motivation I had to play, because there's sometimes I'm not doing very good. I said, I think I want to. The motivation I had was my wife and my fiance at that time. She was from a very affluent family that. Her daddy was a doctor, and she said, John, I don't care what you do, but get the education. And you want to coach, we'll coach, but just you got to get through. So anyway, I had great motivation, and I had great coaches, and Missouri's been very, very good to me. Anything I have, I really got to go back what Missouri's done for me.
You have definitely been good to Missouri also. John Cadillac, always good to talk to you. Thanks for sharing your stories with us today.
Thank you very much, Dave. Well, I enjoyed it.
I hope you've enjoyed our Heritage Show. This is News Talk 1400 KFRU, and our guest has been John Cadillac.
You've been listening to the KFRU Heritage Series, celebrating our history and heritage of Columbia and Boone County. News Talk 1400 KFRU, Columbia.